I think we might make a start, and if anyone else joins us, then I'll just let them in. So,
Certainly.
Well, good. All right. Welcome to Thursday of National Ag Week, as we're calling it here at PIFA. And we have a presentation today by Dr. Catherine Kidman. And Catherine presented for us last year at National Ag Week, and I'm very happy and grateful to have her with us again today to talk about a spotlight on viticulture and winemaking. So thank you, Catherine. And also, if anyone has any questions during the presentation, please put your question into the chat area, which is in the bottom right hand of the screen here. Okay. Thanks, Catherine. Over to you.
No worries. Thanks, Luciano, and good morning, everybody. And thanks for your attention. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit, or give us a spotlight on viticulture and winemaking. And viticulture is kind of a bit of a fancy word for grape growing. So today, I'm going to talk you through some of the things that I do being a grape grower and a viticulturist. So let's start by, what is a viticulturist? So it's somebody who really just grows grapes, and they grow grapes that go on to make wine, or grapes that you buy from the supermarket. We work both outside in the vineyard and inside the office, and some of us also spend a bit of time in laboratories looking at microscopes and looking at vines in detail. Really, our job is to look after the vineyard and everything that grows in it, from the soil to the vines. We also spend a lot of time outside, and we generally love nature and everything that grows in it. One of our main jobs as a viticulturist is to really make sure the vines are growing healthily, and that means that they're free of any pest or disease that could be causing trouble to the grapevines. We spend a lot of time looking up at the sky because the weather is really important to how we grow our grapes, and we spend a lot of time understanding the weather and how this will impact on how we grow our grapes and the growing conditions. We solve problems in the vineyard to make the vines grow better. We do a lot of collection and organising and reporting on data to help with our fruit quality and growth. And finally, we work with winemakers to produce high quality wine and table grapes for eating, the ones that you can buy from the supermarket. So as Luciano alluded to, my name's Catherine Kidman, and I work for a wine company called Wynns Coonawarra Estate. And I thought I might take a little bit of time to show you about where I live and some of the vineyards that I work on. So I have a little video to show you about my region, my hometown of Coonawarra, which is in South Australia. So about 4.5 hours south of Adelaide and about 5 hours west of Melbourne. So I'll just play this video for you if I can. So that's a little bit about my hometown and where I live. And it's at this point that I'd really like to acknowledge the traditional people of this region on which we live and farm. It's the Pinchunga and Bowendik people, and we really pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So for me, what makes my hometown and the place where I grow my grapes really special? Well, it's this beautiful soil that you can see in the image above. It's called Terra Rossa, which translates to red soil. And it's really the main soil type of the region. It's called Terra Rossa, or red earth, because the top layer that you can see is red in colour, and this is because it's made up of oxidised iron, which, like rusty tin, gives that burnt orangey red colour, and it's over the white limestone, which is also unique. And this soil type in particular is very good for growing grapes. It gives a natural balance to the vines, so they don't grow too much or too big or too vigorous. And it also means that we can make really high quality fruit for wine production. So the Terra Rossa soil behaves, or it is a clay soil, so it can have a lot of water in it, but it behaves and drains like a sand. So it's quite a unique soil, and it's one that we're very proud of within our region. So Australia's wine regions, there are 65 of them throughout Australia, and these are known as geographical indicators, or GIs for short. So most of the wine regions in Australia, as you can see from this picture, are grown around the coast. And you might recognise some wine regions around where you are. So I'm all the way down here in Coonawarra, and Adelaide's up here. There's South Australia in particular makes up 51% of the wine production. So it's a very big wine grape growing state. New South Wales comes next, followed by Victoria, and then Tasmania and Western Australia. So grape growings are not actually Indigenous or native to Australia. They came across a long time ago, arriving with the first fleet back in 1788. So the colonists came over and decided that this could be a good place for growing grapevines. The first vineyards were actually planted quite close to Sydney Harbour, if any of you are from Sydney, and more vine cuttings arrived shortly afterwards because they realised that Australia was a really good place for growing grapevines. So what exactly is a grapevine? Well, a grapevine is a specific plant that produces fruit that goes on to make wine or table grapes for eating. So this picture that you're looking at shows grapevines before they're planted into a vineyard in the grapevine nursery. So they're our baby grapevines. So these are also known as rootlings. And we tend to plant these babies in the springtime. And it takes a little bit of time before they grow up to produce their fruit that we can harvest and make into wine or eat as table grapes. We grow our grapevines in rows. And grow them up onto trellis. And we put trellis in our vineyard, which is basically like a clothesline, I suppose, where we put our grapevines across. And that means that the vines have something to grow onto, but it also means that we can see our fruit structures in the same sort of area. So it's a good way to have the vines all neat and tidy in a row. Within the rows, we have grasses or cover crops, and these are really important to help with our soil health, and they also increase all the lovely beneficial insects like bees and ladybirds that we like to encourage within our vineyards because they help with the general goodness and growing of our grapevines. So this is what a grapevine looks like. And the grapevines, obviously, you can see what's up on top of the vineyard on the trellis, but there's a lot going down underneath in the soil. So let's start with the roots. The grapevine roots are very important. They are the anchors and they keep the grapevine upright and standing strong, but they're also really important for getting water to the grapevines and food and nutrients. So they having a healthy soil and root system is really important for grapevine growth. As we move up the vine, we have the trunk, which transports all these nutrients and carbohydrates from the roots up into the grapevine's canopy to help with the growing of the grapevines. As I mentioned, you might be able to see in this picture here the trellis, and this is what we train our grapevines on. And we have shoots that we prune and have growing throughout the growing season. And you can see there's bunches and leaves, growing tips and tendrils. And we like to make sure that our vines are healthy and growing to produce the bunches that you can see here in the picture. So there are about 60 species of grapevines worldwide, and these include more scientific terminology known as Vitis vinifera, Vitis lambrusca, Vitis riparia, and Vitis rupestris. And these different varieties have all evolved from many places across the world. And within each of these species, you can see that there are different varieties. So I've categorized these into three columns or three groups. And we have white varieties, and you might be familiar with some of these varieties names. Maybe perhaps your mum and dad might have some of these wines. So some examples of white varieties include Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, a Pinot Gris or Riesling. Then we move on to red varieties, and they're called red varieties, but really they look like black or purple grapevines. And these varieties go on to make red wine styles. And you can have varieties such as Cabernet Sauvignon, Grenache, Nebbiolo, Sangiovese, and Shiraz. And then we also have table grape varieties. So these are the varieties that you can buy from your supermarket. And some of these that you might know include Crimson Seedless or Muscat and Sultana. And some of you may also be eating some of these sultanas for your recess or lunch today. And these are actually grapevines as well. They're table grapes that have actually been dried in the sun. So they are all related and make a yummy snack too. So how do we tell the difference in these varieties? So how can we see, say, a white variety from a red variety? Well, before the vines turn colour, you can actually tell them apart through a number of techniques. So you can go into the lab or the laboratory and do some DNA testing to see the differences, or you can do a more old-fashioned traditional technique known as ampelography, which is a pretty big word, but it basically means visual identification. So this technique is not as commonly used nowadays, but it's still a really good skill to have. And if some of you live in grapevine regions, you could perhaps try this once we're off this call. So the visual identification happens throughout the year, but we look at specific parts of the grapevine to help with our understanding and and distinguishing what variety it actually is. I've brought in a shoot today to help illustrate how we actually identify the different varieties. Hopefully you can see this here. So if we're wanting to see what variety this is, we can look at the leaf. It's a really good telltale sign. So does this leaf have hair on it? Is it shiny or glossy? Is it felty or woolly underneath? And that's a good clue just to help us establish what variety this might be. We can also look at the teeth size. So it's these little bumpy bits on the leaf. Are they sharp? Are they arched or pointed? And that can be a clue as to what variety this is. But one of the main things that we look at is this little thing here called the petiole sinus. So it's looking on this particular section here. So this is quite different depending on what variety it is. You can have a U-shaped petiole sinus, a V-shaped, or it can be open, or like it is in this particular image, it's slightly overlapping. So there are a number of clues that can help us identify what type of variety this is. And this is actually a Shiraz shoot that I've taken from our vineyard just outside. You can see here, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, the little structure, inflorescent structure that will go on to make the delicious grapevine bunch that we'll harvest in a couple of months' time. So here in Coonawarra, we are a cool climate region, so we have the varieties Riesling, Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz grown here. There are some other varieties as well, but these are the main ones that we grow our fruit for. We don't have any table grapes down here that you buy from the supermarket. We're more a wine grape growing region here in Coonawarra. I have a little challenge for you all, and I thought you could perhaps do this when you step off the call, or you could do this as part of some investigative science. It's called Soil Your Undies, and it's an initiative of Cotton Info, and I think it's a really great challenge, and it's really a way to help understand how healthy our soils are. Soils are really important to not only helping our vines grow, but our vegetables and our fruit trees, and it contributes to the general goodness of growth of our nature and environment. So to do this challenge, what you need are 2 pairs of cotton undies, or perhaps your brother and sister might have some singlets if they're younger. They need to be cotton though, and it's really important because we want to see what microbes are growing underneath our soil, and they tend to like to munch on cotton. So you need a shovel and to go to 2 spots of soil within the school. So for example, you might have a veggie garden, or the side of the school oval, or maybe in the middle of the oval where a lot of football gets played during the winter time. So dig 2 spots and plant these cotton undies or singlets into the soil. You don't have to bury them in too deep, just in the top 5 centimetres of soil, but make sure that you mark the spot because you might forget where you've actually put these undies. So put a little flag there and walk away and wait and watch to see what happens to your soil. Come back in about 1 to 2 months' time and see what's actually happened to these soils. A really healthy soil will have its cotton undies munched away and nibbled by all the living organisms that thrive and survive in your soil. And it would be a really interesting comparison to see how the cotton undies from your vegetable patch compare to, say, the middle of the oval where a lot of football gets played and there's a lot of stomping and jumping around. It's a challenge I hope you might be able to do. But back to the grapevine. So grapevines, we plant them and they stay in our soils and in our vineyards for a long period of time, but they have an annual cycle, so a cycle that goes for the year. So we might walk through this annual growth cycle and explain a little bit more about that. So let's start down here at dormancy in the winter time when it's cold, there's a lot of rain going on. Our vines also sort of shut down during winter time. And it's when we do some pruning, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in the next slide. But come springtime, so a couple of weeks ago, the soil starts to warm up, we start to get some sunshine, and the vines burst their buds. So this is a time known as bud burst. And we move on from bud burst and we have lovely shoot growth. So it's when the vines are really starting to emerge and grow for the season. We have the development of these little structures coming through. So as I showed you before with the Shiraz, these are called inflorescence. So another big word, but it basically means baby bunches. And these baby bunches are what we really try and protect and nurture because they become our grapevines that we'll harvest, our grape bunches that we'll harvest later on in the season. This is flowering. So flowering happens for us in Coonawarra in a couple of weeks, around December time. And flowering is probably my most favourite time in the vineyard. You walk out into the vineyard and you have a beautiful perfume of all these flowers that are flowering. And it's a really important time in the grapevine cycle because these flowers then set the fruit and the berries that we'll harvest at harvest time in April next year. So after flowering, the berries then start to develop into their bigger sizes, and this stage of cycle of the grapevine is known as pea size. And the grape berries at this point in time do sort of look a little bit like green peas. They're really hard. They're not very nice to taste. I wouldn't recommend it. But they're starting to grow and develop into the structures that we'll harvest. For us here in Coonawarra, around early February, we go through a process known as veraison, which is a French terminology, which basically means colour change. So if we have red grape varieties, this is when they turn from green to that purpley bluish sort of colour. It's a beautiful time in the vineyard, and you get lots of different colours and pockets going on throughout the grape bunch. For white varieties, they also undergo veraison, but rather than changing colour, they tend to go a bit soft. And veraison signifies to the grapevine that it's time to start generating sugar. So sugar so that the vines, so the berries start to taste quite nice. They still have a lot of acid, but we're starting to mature and to ripen, getting ready for harvest. And then finally, it's harvest time. So harvest for us occurs from late March through to mid-April here in Coonawarra. And it's really the culmination of when all those sugars are starting to get flavour ripe, there's lovely tastes, and the colour is throughout the whole bunch, and it's when the winemakers say we're ready to pick to make the wine. So throughout these stages, we do a number of techniques to help with our growing of the grapevines. So during dormancy, when it's cold, we go through and prune our grapevines. So we cut them back so that we can have our grapevine bunches at the trellis where we need to see them. What we do at this time of the year in springtime, we might go through and shoot thin. So we try and declump the vineyard because we want all the bunches to have their own space, their own sunlight, and lots of wind getting through as well, so they can basically shine and develop. So what we might do in this particular instance, where there's a lot of clumping and you can't see those structures very well, we might go through and shoot thin. And you can see that we've actually cleaned this vine up, and you can see all the little developing structures here, and it just looks a bit neater. So when we start to see these baby bunches structures coming through, we do a lot of data analysis, so a lot of counting of these inflorescence. And this is really important and one of the main jobs of a viticulturist, because we want to know how many bunches we have out in our vineyard, because that will tell us what our yield is, how much we're going to pick for that particular year. So what we do is go through and count all these structures, but we also can also count the flowers on the vineyard as well. Now at this time, we might also think, right, we want some more light hitting these bunches, and we can do things like mechanical leaf plucking, and I'll show you a little video of a tractor doing just that. So there's lots of machinery and implements that are working through our vineyard to help us grow our grapes and to ensure that they're free of pests and free of disease and are making high quality wine or table grapes. And then finally come April time, when the vines have got sugar and lovely flavour, we go on and harvest our grapevines. So this is a machine harvester. So this runs over the vineyards or the vines, and basically like big fingers, it shakes the vines and it makes all the berries and the bunches fall off into these little teeth that you see, and these teeth collect all the bunches and put them into these bins, which we collect the fruit from, which then goes on to the winery for fermentation. We can harvest our grapevines via machine, or we can pick them by hand. So as a viticulturist, there are a few things that we don't like in our vineyard, and one of these is frost. So here in Coonawarra, we are a cool climate region. We're a little bit inland, and we can get frost, which is occurs in springtime when the temperatures get below zero. So we try to, as viticulturists, we try and do things to make sure that our vines don't get damaged if we do get frost. And some ways in which we help to protect our grapevines is through the use of frost fans. So these are big, big fans that sit out in the middle of the vineyard, and when the temperature gets cold, they start to spin around, and they're really just making sure that the air is moving. So none of that cold air can sit on our lovely leaves and burn them. The other way that we can protect our grapevines is through the use of sprinklers. And the sprinklers are really important, you can see here, because it takes a longer time for water to freeze, and it protects our grapes as a consequence. This is two examples of when we haven't been able to protect our grapevines from frost, and you can see they're not looking very happy. They tend to go all floppy, and these beautiful baby bunches won't survive, and they tend to crinkle up and go all dry, and we can't harvest them. So we try our very best to protect our grapevines from frost. So as I mentioned earlier, flowering is probably my most favourite time in the vineyard, and there's a lot going on in the vineyard at this time of year when flowering occurs. So you have that beautiful smell in our vineyards, but it's also a really important time. Particularly, we need to look at the weather during flowering and fruit set. So this is the inflorescence before flowering occurs, and it starts to separate, and then you get these little caps that fall off and expose the flowers. These flowers are very smart. They have both the male and the female structures inside them. So they don't necessarily need bees to help with fertilization, but we do love our bees in our vineyards. But the grapevines are quite smart in that they can self-pollinate. And this is a picture of a grapevine doing just that. So this is the pollen that we get from the flowers landing on top of the stigma, and it's growing these pollen tubes which deliver, fertilize these ovules that then go on to make the seeds for the grape berries. So if we have bad weather during this process, this can interrupt this fertilization, and it can result in an uneven bunch. So we want to make sure, if we can, to have really nice weather at flowering and fruit set. Otherwise, we can end up with an uneven bunch where fertilization doesn't occur, and you get these green little hard berries, and you can also get these seedless berries because the pollen hasn't been able to fertilize the ovules. So these tiny little seedless berries that you can see down the bottom of this screen, they don't grow very big, and they are quite tart and yucky to taste compared to the normally developed bunches. So we try and do everything we can to make sure that the flowering and fruit set process is a success, and we're watching the weather and hoping that we get good weather at this time of year. So another really key component of my job and what I do as a viticulturist is irrigation management. And irrigation is a big word, but it basically means watering of our vineyards. So we do a lot of measuring and data analysis to make sure that we're giving the vines just the right amount of water that they need to grow a beautiful crop. We don't want too much water, but we don't want them to have too little water either. So it's really a Goldilocks theory, just the right amount of water for them to grow their grapevines. We have a lot of monitoring devices in the vineyard that sit in the soil, and they tell us when's the right time to turn the tap on and give our grapevines a drink. We also have another really cool technique that I run around our vineyards with, and it's called a pressure bomb, and it tells us how tightly our grapevines are holding onto their water. The tighter they hold onto the water, the more stress they might get. And we have some numbers that relate to how thirsty these grapevines might be. If we have numbers at less than 1, we know that the vines are happy, they've got plenty of water and they're just cruising. When we get to the middle image, they're starting to get a little bit thirsty. Their drink bottles are getting a little bit low, so we might start to turn the tap on, and we don't want to get to this stage where they're really thirsty and need a drink. But it's a good way to measure and make sure that our grapevines are happy and healthy and growing for good quality fruit. So I'm going to leave you now with another video, which is looking at how red wine is made, because at the end of the viticulturist journey, we hand our grapevines over to the winemakers to make wine out of. So here's a little video to take you through the process of red wine making.
In its most basic form, wine can be made by simply letting grapes ferment on their own. What makes wine complex and extremely enjoyable is the potential for winemakers to influence this process in many ways. There are typically 9 key steps from vine to bottle. Picked by hand or harvested by specialized machinery, winemakers and viticulturists pick grapes at the right time to suit the style of wine they're making. Depending on the style of wine being made, the stems and leaves are often removed by a destemmer before grapes are crushed to release their juices. Crushing methods range from stomping barefoot through to the use of specialized machinery. Some winemakers choose to keep whole bunches as part of the ferment, adding extra complexity and tannin to the finished wine. Once crushed, the grapes are left to ferment together with their skins and seeds, adding color, flavor, and tannin. Fermentation is when the yeast turns the sugars into alcohol. As grapes contain their own sugars and yeast, this process can happen naturally, but some winemakers choose to add cultivated yeast to help control the process and achieve a certain outcome. The grapes are then pressed to remove skins and seeds and release the juice. Malolactic fermentation is a secondary fermentation phase most red wines go through. The malic acid in the wine is converted to lactic acid, which creates a softer, fuller mouthfeel and reduces the perceptible level of acidity. Wine can be left to mature in stainless steel, oak, or other vessels like clay amphora or concrete tanks. Winemakers can play with the period of time the wine ages, ranging from several months to several years. Blending allows the winemaker to play with styles and tastes by mixing different varieties or batches of grapes together. A mix of varieties can be blended, or batches of the same variety can be mixed to adjust the flavor, acidity, and tannin levels of a wine like Shiraz. Fining and filtering are used to improve the clarity of wine and remove any undesired compounds. An agent is added to help bind the sediment and particles together, allowing them to be removed easily through filtering. The wine is now ready to be bottled and sealed with either a traditional cork or a steel screw cap, then labelled. Some wines are ready to drink straight away, while others continue to mature in the bottle and get better with age.
So that's where my presentation ends, and I love being a viticulturist. It's such a wonderful opportunity to be out within nature, growing grapevines, and really exploring what makes our vineyards tick, making sure that our soils are healthy, our grapevines are healthy, and it's a really wonderful way to combine our curious minds with our beautiful, wonderful environment that we're able to live in. So thank you very much for your attention, and if there's any questions, I'd welcome them.
Thanks, Catherine. Yes, if anyone has any questions, you can put your questions into the chat area, and so that was fantastic, Catherine. And I have a couple of questions in terms of I'm really interested to know a little bit more about irrigation, because at school, students learn a lot about sustainability and how to be more sustainable in their own world. But what makes what are some aspects of the irrigation that you talked about? You talked about monitoring and measuring the amount of moisture in the soil.
Mhm.
How does that help a vineyard be more sustainable?
Sure. So it's really important to make sure that we're only applying the right amount of water at that right time. And so having techniques like the soil moisture monitoring, or doing the asking the vine how thirsty it is, it means that we're only applying the right amount of water rather than wasting water when the vines don't necessarily need it. So it's really important that we do actually only apply water when we need to, rather than just as part of a schedule. And it helps us with looking after our precious water resource and making sure that it's available for everyone to utilise.
We just had a thank you from Matthew, and that's great. Thanks for joining us today, Matthew. I've got another question about how you manage pests and diseases. There's a thing called integrated pest management that's used, and that's a big word with lots of different meanings to it. But how do viticulturists manage the pests and diseases in such a way that it doesn't affect the final product?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, we need to go out and do a lot of monitoring and measuring to make sure we know what pests are out there. Are there a lot of them, or just a few of them? And we can do a lot of different techniques. So there are a lot of beneficial insects that we can use to help, outcompete for the nasty ones that we don't want. So we can put, say for example, chooks that might eat the snails in the vineyards through, or we could deploy ladybirds throughout the vineyard that will nibble on other baddies that we don't necessarily want in the vineyard. So it's really about making sure that you know what you have out in your vineyard, and then you can address that sustainably and make sure that that we have the good bugs out competing the bad bugs. And so to ensure that, we make sure that we have the right environment, so the right food sources for the good bugs to thrive and live on.
Yes, I think that's very important in terms of sustainability, that you don't just go out there and spray everything with a chemical that will kill the good and the bad bugs. And it's really managing and monitoring that to make sure that all the good bugs have a chance to help out, because chemicals and things like that are very expensive, and
they are.
They don't actually help the situation in the end. So let's see if everyone's a bit shy this morning, but another question about if a young person's interested in getting involved in a career in viticulture, what are some of the things that a young person might do to get involved with the viticulture industry?
Oh, there's lots of things that you can do. That if you live near a grape growing region, it would be great to go out and talk to viticulturists or winemakers and see what's out there. I guess other ways is to ask your teachers to see if you can get a bit more information on how to grow grapes. Some schools have little vineyards, or are starting to play with vineyards, and there are opportunities also to contact your regions to see whether you can have some interaction with viticulturists or winemakers. And we're always more than happy to show schools around our vineyards and show them through the process of viticulture and winemaking. So really reach out to your to people that are involved in the industry, and we'd be more than happy to help your understanding of it.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've come to the end of our session for today, and I really appreciate your time and your fantastic presentation today, Catherine. And today's presentation will be recorded and shared across our networks, and I think there's a great deal of interest in viticulture. I know there's lots of schools that do have grapevines, and I think it's just an industry that has such potential for young people into the future, and we're very fortunate in Australia to
Yes.
have a fantastic viticulture and winemaking tradition, which is very, very important. So
Yes, indeed.
thank you, and thanks to the schools that logged in today to listen. So I very much appreciate your efforts today, and again, thanks so much, Catherine, for your presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be with you today. Thank you.